To introduce our main program today, I'm pleased to welcome to the stage your VP of Programs this year. And just as I pause to do that, let's show a little love for Beth. We've had some amazing programs in the first 21 weeks, and we've got more to come. But Beth, please introduce today's main speaker.
Oh, thank you, Jeff. I really appreciate that. Okay, Rotarians, if any of you have been multitasking, now is the time to focus in because this program is going to give you lots to think about. A 32-year veteran of the Seattle Police Department, Detective Kim Bogucki is a globally recognized leader for creating innovative partnerships between police and community members. She is in high demand as a consultant and speaker, both nationally and overseas. She's keynoted numerous conferences and events and has delivered 3 popular TEDx talks. Now, I've known Kim a long time, and she's one of those rare individuals who sees a need in our community and then creates a unique solution to address it. Just a couple examples. She developed the Donut Dialogues to bridge the divide between police and homeless youth. She used the play West Side Story to bring young people together with law enforcement to address gang violence, immigration, police, and youth relations. And she's most widely known as co-founder of the IF Project, something you're going to hear more about in her talk. And if you thought all of that keeps Kim busy, she also is a fellow with NYU's Marin Institute of Urban Management, where she helps policymakers identify problems, develop solutions, and test them. Her current project is evaluating environmental design to see whether adjustments to light, sound, and color inside prisons can lower anxiety and stress, as well as decrease infractions and time spent in segregation. So with that, my fellow Rotarians, I will turn it over to Kim to share more of her insights and ideas on how community engagement can be redefined. Kim?
Thank you. Can you all hear me okay? It's
Yeah.
It's really odd doing Zoom stuff. I miss being in front of people, but thank you for having me today. And I'm super nervous because I have 2 of my mentors, Beth and Bobby, in the room. So I'm sweating a little bit. And I just want to know, anybody else wearing thermals below the shirt that we see or something super comfortable in sweatpants? That's the one thing I love about being able to do stuff virtually, about the only thing. Anyways, you're going to hear a little bit about the IF Project today, but before I start talking about it, I would love to play the trailer for the documentary that was filmed. Took 7.5 years to film it. So I'm going to roll the trailer and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the project, what's going on in policing as soon as we're done. So, Mariah, can you get us going? Thanks.
The hardest thing about being here is realizing that life goes on without you.
I don't have nothing. I can't do nothing for myself. I can't do nothing for my family. I can't do nothing.
My reality is I sit here for 17 years, and when I walk out that gate, I hope I have it together enough to where I won't come back.
My name is Kim Bogucki, and I am a Seattle Police Detective. Don't worry, I'm not here to arrest anybody. Apparently that's already happened. What I'm here to do is to try to figure out what it's going to take when you get out, if you're getting out, how to keep you out.
So I was thinking to myself, if. That word is not little to me. It's huge.
We're going to write a letter. This is a letter to yourself.
If someone had told me that the world actually needed me, then maybe I wouldn't have had to come to prison to get free.
Here was my road, and then here was this road that Kim was offering.
So it's cop and convict working together side by side.
She was asking out of care. I almost felt like a kid standing there, and she was like, come on, if I could help you, what could have I done?
It's not every day you get somebody that'll come along, like this IF program, that will help you pull things that you done stuff for 49 years that you choose not to talk about.
It helps my self-worth. If you don't have self-worth about yourself, you ain't gonna do nothing.
I'm just so excited about going out there and showing the world that people can change.
you would have told me 8 years ago that I'd be hanging around in prison and working with felons, I would have laughed at you.
You've changed my life.
Moving forward, what do you need?
Make room for me.
We have room for you. Can you take a breath? All right, when you're ready. Thank you. So I just wanted to kind of touch on, from what I hear, International Rotary needs to give Seattle for a shout out, because what your mission is as far as providing service, promoting integrity, advancing world understanding, goodwill, and peace through fellowship, business, professional, and community leaders. That's exactly what I feel like is the importance of IF as well. And so I am honored that you actually want to hear about this part of the population that we very rarely talk about. So I want to try to go quick so I can get to some statistics, which are super important. But it started in 2008. I walked into that prison to meet with a group of mothers. Had no idea when I walked through the threshold I was going to see them and go, holy cow, these are not what I had remembered arresting for 20 years. They actually look like women that I would want to hang out with. And they didn't like me because the last time they saw a police officer and they knew I was police, somebody was putting them in handcuffs and they were probably getting removed from their families and their children. And so it was super icy. And I randomly just asked the if question. And the if question that's the entire precipice for this whole thing is, if there was something somebody could have said or done to change the path that led you here, what would it have been? Kind of looked at me, kind of deer in headlights. But one of the women, Renata, and she was in that video, Renata Abramson, she decided on her own. And Renata's family, career criminals, hate the police, not a matter if you go to prison, when, how many times you go. Renata got over her hatred in that moment and started asking the women to write that answer down. So when I went in 2 months later to do a sleepover with Girl Scouts Beyond Bars, buy cookies, it's a really good program. That's the one little plug I'll do for Girl Scouts. She handed me a stack of papers, and those were the answers to that if question. And I think what I was so incredibly moved by was how much knowledge, information, I was working with youth at the time, and these women had just laid out what would have changed their path to prison. And I'm like, we are missing the boat and not bringing them to the table for these conversations when we want to do intervention and prevention. So they gave selflessly of themselves. They didn't give any days off or extra commissary or anything. They just decided they wanted to change kids' lives. So that is how it started. And that has been like mushrooming. And after a while, some of them started getting out. And it was like, wow, like, what does reentry look like? These are things as a police officer I had never thought about. What happens when somebody comes home? We're hustling to the next car deciding if we're going to arrest somebody. We're not even thinking about what happens when you have a felony or misdemeanor, for that matter, attached to yourself when you're trying to get to jobs or housing, etc. So currently today, from all of those answers, and we've asked women, men, and juveniles, we have a Bureau of Justice Administration grant where we're doing a deep dive into opioid addiction with women that are releasing from our state systems into King County. So we're putting a reentry program together focused primarily on women. We've also got a youth program. We're currently in juvenile detention once a week. It's amazing for me to be able to bring in police officers virtually now, but into detention with formerly incarcerated adults that have gone through the system and actually turned their lives around, and be able to stand side by side, police officers. I don't use the word convict anymore. That when I watch that film, I always cringe when I hear it, because that is not a word anymore. It's a person that's been formerly incarcerated or impacted sometimes, and sometimes the language changes a lot. But we're standing side by side with these kids trying to figure out, how can we help you? What do you need to ask for so you don't have to end up in the back of my patrol car or following in my team's footsteps to prison? And that's been extremely powerful. And then we've also got a personal reentry plan. Every single person getting out of prison is an individual. We cannot broad brush all of the stuff that we're doing. And I'm going to do a little bit more of a deep dive in that note. The one thing that I've learned that I think is most important that we do not talk about a lot in this country, especially in our criminal justice system, is the lack of female voice, or those that identify as female. So the one thing that's staggering to me is, since the late 80s, female incarceration is up about 852%. So think about those numbers. Even if we have less women in prison, the arrest rate is going up at a higher rate than men, which is crazy. Because, and Rebecca, I want to do a little shout out. Thank you for sharing your story. I know that's not always easy,
But when you share your stories, like we share those if stories, that is how you change people's minds and make them aware of what's going on. So what we learned is 85 to 90% of women that are incarcerated have been sexually or physically abused. This is the other one that always gets me. 85 to 90% of women that are incarcerated are mothers. So if you take a look at that many women that are incarcerated as mothers, the next generation of incarceration quite possibly is right behind them. So how do we figure out how to get these women rehabilitated, happy, healthy, whole, so when they come home, they can be mothers again? And how can we be a part of doing that? And every single bit of the work that IF does has people at the table that are a part of the audience we were trying to serve. I'm not going to sit up here. I don't have lived experience. I have police experience, and I've got a lot of friends that are felons, but I don't have that lived experience. So what do they think needs to happen? And they're always a part of the conversation. And one of the things that's super interesting too is probably looking at female incarceration has only been around since like early 2000 with Covington and Bloom and Van Hoors and some people that were leaders in the field. And a friend of mine, Dr. Emily Salisbury, who right now is at Utah State, they came up with what they call the female 4, which I think is interesting. The top 4 reasons that lead a man to prison versus a woman to prison, not one of them is the same. And the women's female 4 are unhealthy relationships, not really surprising. Chemical dependency, could be alcohol, drugs, whatever. Socioeconomic issues, think about it. A woman is not making the same amount as a man. If you get arrested, you can't bail out. You get a fine, you can't pay it. You end up with FTAs, all this stuff. And then anxious depressive disorder, the mental health issue that needs to get addressed. For men, it's previous criminal record, antisocial friends, antisocial environment, and antisocial behavior. So if you look at the female 4 versus just the 4, the other thing that I think really weaves into this is 1 in 4 girls have been sexually assaulted, 1 in 6 boys. So when you think about those children, that early childhood trauma that doesn't get dealt with, how it ends up manifesting as adolescents and young adults is exactly what we're seeing in our criminal justice system right now. So I think really getting at the front end of the fire hose, we have to look at early childhood education. We have got to deal with early childhood trauma. If you don't know about ACEs, look up ACEs scores and stuff like that. That adverse childhood things that happen when you're a child, they can pretty much determine what's going to happen as you become an adult. And these are the things that we've learned. Now, the other thing that is been really interesting for me as a police officer is, you know, and I was a young cop, we were just literally running, we used to say running and gunning, which is probably not appropriate anymore these days, but we were going call to call to call, next person, we weren't even thinking about the person that was in the back of our car. And there's times when I would like have time, I'd be waiting in line to take them into prison or jail, and I'd talk to them and like they would start sharing their story and things started clicking. So when the work with the homeless community started, I'm like, you know, I want to know why you're homeless. Like, so now with IF, it's like, why did you end up in this situation? And I think that that's one thing when we're doing police training now with everything that's going on, we have to understand the pathways that have led to incarceration. It's not the immediacy of the crime. There's always, and I always tell this when I talk to police, there's a story behind every set of handcuffs that you're going to put on somebody. And because of the discretion that we have when we're doing that, what are you going to do in the meantime? If you have to arrest them, if they're a woman, do they got kids at home? Last thing you want is a kid coming home to an empty house wondering what happened to mom. And then they find out the police arrested them, and now they're afraid of the police. So it just starts creating this division. And I have to be honest, and it's probably controversial sometimes in my profession. And I just did a keynote for the California Police Chiefs Conference, and I'm not surprised it was a 50-50 split on how it landed. But police historically have been a problem with the racial divide and disparity in this country. I mean, we were the ones that brought the slaves home. And when we're educating ourselves and trying to figure out what to do in this new way of reimagining, we have to acknowledge our historical place in that. And I think for, police officers, I mean, I don't want to say that it doesn't happen or it hasn't happened. Data doesn't lie. We incarcerate Black and brown people, Indigenous people at a higher rate in this country than any country in the world. And actually, any country in the world, we have a higher incarceration rate. So for people that are taxpayers like us, our taxpayers' money is keeping people in prison. So how do we start cutting that back so we're not spending as much taxes on housing people? What does that look like? And I think the other thing is when you're training officers is if they don't understand historically what a badge and a uniform represents, then they're walking into potentially a community situation not really knowing or understanding where that comes from historically. And also the new research on the trauma in our DNA. So I have ancestral trauma in my DNA from what has happened to my family. So if you imagine Black and brown people and indigenous people in this country, they have that ancestral trauma in their DNA. And we finally, you know, I would say since May with the murder of George Floyd, we're finally starting to have some extremely painful, difficult conversations about racism in our country. And I don't want to blame, I'm not blaming it on the police whatsoever. I think the police and the criminal justice system, the correction system, it's the end of the fire hose. And getting to the beginning of the fire hose is understanding that if question, understanding that story that has actually led somebody from being a child going along and ending up in the system. And the other thing that's fascinating is, you know, with if we've traveled all over the world. We were in Nigeria about 4 years ago, and just taking a look at what leads their populations to prison, and the same 4 factors for women versus men, it was the same thing. But the overarching factor globally in the world that leads somebody to incarceration is poverty. And I don't think there's anybody in this room that when faced with trying to figure out how to take care of your family, feed your kids, feed yourself, or do whatever, when it gets down to that, you may end up choosing something that we would consider to be criminal in order to survive. So a lot of the folks that we've dealt with, we found out, especially the women, they are in constant survival mode to take care of themselves and take care of their family. And the things that they're choosing to do or ending up in bad relationships and ending up being co-defendants in are a result of constantly trying to figure out how to just make it to the next day, to the next breath. So that's just kind of some of the stuff that, you know, if has taught me. And I think the other thing that's interesting to know when you're talking about like where you're putting your tax dollars or what that looks like, most people don't realize in our country, 1 in 4 people have a record. So think about that. 1 in 4 people have a record. Could be misdemeanor, could be a felony. So when you're taking a look at somebody having to check a box or do what they have to do to get housing, when you've gotten out of prison or you've gotten out of jail and you've done the time, you still have that ball and chain attached to you that prevents you from coming back into society and being able to be, you know, hopefully a successful person that's paying taxes and stimulating the economy. And the other thing that's really interesting is 95 to 97% of people that are in prisons are coming home. So think about that. 95 to 97% of people that are incarcerated are coming home. This is where it gets really weird, and this is where we have a broken system. 70% of those people are going to recidivate, meaning they're going to go back to prison in the first 2 years of release. So if you kind of take a look at this, I mean, you guys are business people, you take a look at this like wash, rinse, repeat, billions of dollar system, we have to figure out how to break some of those cycles. You know, I know Dan Satterberg yesterday talked about the introduction of that, can't remember what he's going to call it, like a community group that's going to make some decisions on accountability for people that are, you know, have committed crimes because of poverty. So I'm very interested to see how that's going to turn out, but I think it's a conversation that we need to be having, because I don't want my tax dollars paying for somebody that may have a chemical dependency issue, that's medical, may have a mental health issue, that's medical. Prison isn't the place for them. That we have to start creating systems where that stuff is absolutely dealt with before it ends up being criminal to actually have a medical situation. So, you know, I'm super proud of the Seattle Police Department. I know, you know, we're taking a lot of blows right now to the stomach across the country, but you know, we have our CRT team, our crisis response team. We have an officer, a detective, and a mental health provider that go out together to respond to calls that officers are like, you know what, this is arrestable, but it's obviously there's something mental health going on. Let's call this team out and see if we can get an involuntary or get the person the help that they need. So I'm hoping that more programs like that actually can be developed and exist, and some of the higher priority calls, those can be police calls. But I do think until we can take a look at a system that has accountability, but also takes a look at the reasons why people are led down the path that they're led down. You know, one of the things that I've learned lately with having to go virtual with COVID and stuff, we've been in the detention facility, and I think that last time we were there, The guys are in there actually right now. There's 24 young men locked up. 9 of those young men are getting auto declined on, meaning they're going to get tried as adults. So they probably have done something pretty criminal in everybody's mind. They're probably shooters in a shooting. I'm just going to make that, don't hold me to it. This is Kim speaking, not a police officer. But the one thing that when I asked them, like, how would you reimagine policing? What would that look like to you? Like if somebody came to you and gave you a magic fairy dust and we could change the system. And I said, what would it be? And the funny thing is not one of them said, let me out, I shouldn't be here, you know, et cetera, et cetera. They said, we just need to have cops that we know that if they come into the community, they actually know us. They know that that person that they're responding to, there's a mental health issue, or they know the family dynamic or the relationship and that stuff. So I'm a big proponent of getting, you know, people out of their cars and getting to know community and making sure that community feels safe and trusts the police, because right now they don't, because of what we've seen over and over and over since George Floyd and even before George Floyd. So we do have some repair work that we have to do. And it's important. It's important to do. So I guess, you know, all in all, I just appreciate being here today. I know some of you, I mean, everybody's really struggling with COVID. So I'm just sending you as much, you know, positive energy as I can as we get through this. And I don't know about you, but this has been a real reflective time for me as far as what's really important. What's important for me? How much am I working? How much shouldn't I be working? You know, and somebody said earlier, how much, you know, there's a lot of people struggling. You know, what hand can you give? I'm not saying hand out, but what hand up can you give in the positions that you're in with some of these people that are really struggling right now? So I'd ask you, if you have somebody come across your table or something like that, or you're applying for a job or something that's got a record, like, get to know the person. Please get to know the person, get to know their story. And honestly, their story matters in how we're going to change the criminal justice system. And quite honestly, when you end up hiring somebody that has a record, they end up being pretty loyal employees. And they walk around with that scarlet F of felon for the rest of their lives. So they end up being really loyal, good employees. And you know, I don't know about you, but I certainly wouldn't want to be judged on the worst thing that I've done in my life. And I'm not going to tell you what it is or the 5 things that I've done, but you know, that's what happens when somebody ends up in the system. And the problem is we could have started it so much earlier on. But with that trauma not getting taken care of, we are seeing what ends up at the end of the system. You know, you know, I said it in the movie, like, I have friends that have done stuff that I don't even, they aren't those people that they were when they were 16, 17, 18. They're not those people. They're 40-year-old, 50-year-old adults that have that experience, that lived experience, but they're valuable in preventing the other folks that are coming up making those decisions in their survival. But yeah, I never thought I would say that I have friends that are, you know, they've been in prison for 10, 15, 20 years, but I consider a lot of them family, and they have made me a much better cop, and quite honestly, a much better person in trying to figure out how to navigate the world and be inclusive and not exclusive, and keep that us and them divide going. So that's about it for me. Is there any questions?
There's a lot of questions. Hi, Kim. Good job. Thank you so much. I will speak on behalf of every 131 people on this call right now that I think we're probably speechless. So
that's good. I'm taking a breath here.
I think you did all that in one breath, so that is pretty impressive. That's a lot of amazing work. If you have the chance after we're done with the Q&A, you should read some of the chat. There's a lot of love for you in there. So let's start with a couple of questions. One from Sten. Kim, I noticed how many of the prisoners are people of color. What percentage of the 6.8 million prisoners are people of color?
Well, I knew that somebody was going to ask me that today. I don't have that on me. It'd take me a second, but I think that I know the breakdown for women because I just looked at it. I don't know, so I'm not going to ask that, but it's disproportionately higher. I will say what's fascinating is the IF Project is in all the women's prisons in California as well. We do our writing workshop down there. And what I found really interesting is when you walk into WCCW, which is our Washington Correction Center for Women, our max prison in Washington, or you walk into Mission Creek, which is it's our medium, 4 years to the gate. it's very homogenous here. It's very white here. But when you go into California, like Chowchilla is the biggest women's prison in the world. It is black and brown. You do not see a lot of white women. So it just depends on where you are in the country. But overall in this country, especially black men, it's extremely high.
Kim, I shared the statistics in the chat field, broken down both by male and female for the audience.
Thank you.
All right, next question from Beth. Does or should the police academy bring in formerly incarcerated people to share their story so new officers can better understand their journey?
Absolutely. In fact, one of the trainers at the Washington State Criminal Justice Training Academy, Jen Eshholm, who unfortunately switched her patches from Seattle to King County, but I won't fault her for it. She mentored one of our women getting out because we have a mentoring program, and that's been a really powerful thing for her, and not coming from me, because I tend to be a little bit more like, hey, let's try this, and it's out of the box. Whereas Jen's been, you know, on the street and teaching, and she was able to kind of bring that into the training academy. So I don't know if Sue Rar, who's running it, is still doing that, but I know that that's something that they're open to. And that's an absolutely yes answer. Because the other thing that's interesting is I have a lot of cops come up and go, oh man, my sister was in prison, or my dad shot my mom and my mom's dead and my dad's in prison, but it's this dirty little secret. And if it keeps being this dirty little secret, we're never going to have a conversation about how many people are actually affected by incarceration. In Japan, when you get out of prison, I've been to their prisons there, you don't have to tell anybody you're in prison. And, you know, at 7 years, this is the other thing that's fascinating. At a 7-year sentence, when you get into that 8th year is when you start the institutionalization of being in prison, and it's a lot harder to integrate back. So that's why there's a lot of look at long-term sentences and the effect on it. And when you think about response versus react, frontal lobe development, we have a lot, we're taking a look at a lot of juvenile life things because their response versus react isn't fully developed till they're 26, 27 years old. Yet these kids, and you know, they have to be accountable. Like there has to be an accountability measure in what happens, but they are making decisions so quickly. And then they, I mean, we've talked about it. Then they're like going, holy bleep, 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 bleep. I mean, the boys in juvenile that are looking at some time, I said, what do you think is one of your main factors for bringing you here? And in unison, they all said gun violence. In unison, I didn't, that was them. That came from them. That didn't, you know, the other thing I wish they would look at more is most of them are black and brown, and they don't even understand how racism has affected them ending up incarcerated as well. So that's something we're trying to teach them about.
All right. Kim, what are the biggest successes you've seen with IF? And conversely, what are the failures, and how can Rotary help?
Biggest successes. Boy, I've seen a lot of women. It's sad because going to prison is what actually had the pause in their lives for them to realize that they weren't stupid or dumb. They could actually get an education. They were smart. They needed to learn how to parent. We've got some that learned how to do Braille, and the Washington Braille Association wouldn't hire her because she had a felony. So I had to get on the phone with them and say, can you just pilot something? Because you're teaching this craft inside that is a marketable thing outside, and you can work from home. And so they ended up giving her a job, and that was great. Those are just little ones. We've had people become, you know, lawyers. I mean, Soraya Cook at Civil Survival, there's a good story in general. Tara Simmons just got elected. That made that made history. These are people that have been incarcerated. Now they might not have been in IF, but they work with IF in some capacity. Failures. You know, it's interesting. I got over a long time ago, if they went back to prison, it was a failure. Because the one thing that in all of this work that I've really been aware of lately is we are trying to, or I am trying to make you either take your medicine so that you can deal with your mental health issue, or stop doing drugs, and then you got to deal with what's leading you to having done the drugs. So I think that I can make you as another human being make the decision to change. And it comes down to that personal time or tipping point or choice of that individual going, okay, I'm ready. And I think the important thing is it's like, okay, if it took you going back, you fell down, you got up, you're going back. Now let's figure out what you want to do next time you come out. So I don't really, you know, I could get a little emotional. I think the 2 overdoses that the women are no longer here, that was sad to me because they didn't reach out and ask for help. And there was kids left in the wake of that. That's painful stuff. But as a system, we don't have anything set up yet to actually have people deal with their mental health and chemical dependency where it isn't stigmatized. So.
Okay. From Jevin, we've got 9 minutes. 8 minutes left to questions. So if there are 4 things that put women on the path to prison, what are the 4 things that keep them from going back?
Boy, I'm gonna
it's a heavy question.
I'm gonna hit Dr. Salisbury up with that. That's a great, thank you for that question. I would say from my personal experience in watching them is learning self-efficacy, understanding their self-worth, teaching them about what a healthy relationship is versus an unhealthy relationship. There's a lot of untangling to do, not just with romantic relationships, but with parental or guardian relationships that need to be untangled. And I would say the other thing is that they know that they can survive on their own with their kids. So a sustainable wage type job that they actually like doing. So they don't have to rely on another person in their life to provide.
Yeah, okay. Can you address court diversion programs and how they are helping to treat root causes? Do we need more diversion-based programs?
26 thumbs up on more diversion programs, yes. Also, with diversion, you have to have accountability. So if people are going to start talking about diversion or restorative justice or whatever, like, I mean, I have this dream of where a kid sits down and he or she has done something, or a person is like, here's the 10 things that you're going to choose 3 of that you think are fair for what you did. And if the victim will actually participate in that too, what do you feel like is fair prior to maybe incarceration is one of them, maybe it's not. And see if we can actually come into some agreement on what both sides agree. But prior to making that decision, really unpacking what the pathway was that led to the act that was criminal, so that we can figure out where those potholes are from a social, emotional, or what's the word I want? I lost it. That's what happens. Anybody else have Zoom fatigue? I will share this with you. I don't do this often, but this is my Zoom fatigue hat. So if it gets really bad, I just put that on. Feel a little better now. Okay, now I'm not gonna forget any more of my words.
All right.
So,
I need to pick
and
up.
I custom make them for holidays if you'd like.
Oh, good. Can I pick up on the question you just answered? I don't know what diversion means. Explain that real quick. And maybe I'm the only one on the whole call that doesn't know what that means.
No, we have drug court. Instead of actually doing some time, there's a 2-year program that they can go to. So it's diverting from incarceration, either jail or prison. And on a quick note, you end up in jail if you're sentenced to 365 days or less. You will go to prison if you're sentenced to 365 days plus 1 or more. So that's the difference between where you go. And diversion tries to avoid that incarceration piece. So I will say that there's a great program that David Martin in the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office is doing as far as diversion for women, that if you put them in the system, they will have put in a no contact order, been a victim of sexual abuse, child abuse, any type of abuses, and obviously been in a probably really bad DV situation because they were actually on the no contact order for somebody. Then they crossed over and committed a crime. So instead of charging them with this crime, can we go back and deal with this trauma that wasn't dealt with to see if that will end up mitigating them continuing down a criminal path? And that's actually done by the YWCA, and it's called Survivors First, and it's a great program. So things like that I think are extremely powerful. And Satterberg is looking at 1,000 adults and 800 kids next year, not incarcerating, but actually figuring out some other type of programming to do as opposed to having them have to be taken out of society.
Okay, powerful. Thank you. Is there work being done to provide job opportunities for the previously incarcerated? That seems important, but really hard.
It's actually not that hard. There's a lot of organizations and jobs and stuff. Construction's a huge one. Labor unions have been great that actually have, which tend to unfortunately be geared more towards men, but there are felon-friendly employers. So that actually, and everybody kind of knows where to go. There's another organization that we do a lot of work with called WELD, where they they were hiring people that were incarcerated to work construction for them. They have a business called Square Peg, and they were sleeping in their cars. And so what would happen is the guy would call up and go, hey, can you go board up the house that you guys are going to do the work on in 6 months? We got squatters in there. And so finally, Amy King goes, hey, you know what? What if we actually take 2 of my employees that are living in their car now, put them in the house, we'll pay the utilities, but they'll take pride in the house, they'll mow the lawn, they'll take care of it. And when you get your permitting, we'll move them to somewhere else. So now they've got 28 houses that they actually are able to provide for reentry. And from that, they have a thing called Weld Works, where they're putting together where people can call and go, hey, I need somebody and I'd be willing to hire somebody with a record. And then probably early next year, we have a project opening called 1426, which is at 1426 Jackson. And it's going to be the first ever collaborative reentry center. So I imagine IF will be there. Weld and Weld Works, it's under their umbrella. They will be there. We'll have mental health. We'll have chem dependency. In the basement, we're going to have yoga, music, and art. So if you've done some work inside and you started working on your reentry, you're going to get the ticket to get in the door and have these wraparound services from these other places that actually know their lane. Because a lot of organizations end up super siloed. And if you think about going to, Seattle, for God's sake, it can be a 1-lane road, but if we can build a freeway and we all know our lanes, we can get a lot more people through the system collaboratively working together. So I'm super excited about what 1426 is doing. And a big part of that is the employment and housing part.
Okay. I think I got time for one more question, and it's quite personal. How did you get to be a police officer?
I sent the application in for police and fire, the same work, and police responded first. But actually, when I went to Seattle University, and played basketball. And one of the things that I loved about CLU is we had to do, community service. And I worked at the St. James Cathedral soup kitchen and really started getting to know like what was going on in the street. And then I also spent a week downtown Seattle. And back in those days, because I'm 55, I know you guys are all going, oh my gosh, yeah, I'm 55. I started policing when I was like 15. But I was looking at these kids and thinking, oh my God, like what happened? Why are you here? So that started my brain ticking and wanting to figure out how to do something where I could be of service and help. And I think with my education at Seattle University, it just kind of solidified that as well. And we had a lieutenant from Seattle Police come in one day and talk to us. And I was like, oh, I could do this. And I did.
Oh my God, I need your hat. Fatigue. I couldn't find my
I'll make one for you.
Kim, yeah. If you could do it in green and orange, that'd be great. Thank you. On behalf of everybody, I want to thank you so much. An incredible program. There are so many questions building up, and I'm sorry I couldn't get to all of it. As a matter of fact, out of all the time I've done this on the Zoom, I've never seen this many questions. So I've never seen this many people on the call, and I've never seen this many questions. So I don't know if you have the chance to look at it, see some kudos, maybe answer some. That would be awesome.
I got one answer. Looking at other countries, what Norway's doing right now is unbelievable. There's a program called Amend. So Washington State Department of Corrections is taking a look at it. Oregon's implementing it, but it is a rehabilitation program if somebody's in prison, and it's quite powerful. Was supposed to actually go there before COVID hit, but there are other countries that are doing better than what we're doing here.
And Kim, I just wanted to add my thanks as well. And hearing your session reminded me of a quote from that Russian author Dostoevsky, who lived over 100 years ago. He said, a society should be judged not by how it treats its outstanding citizens, but how it treats its criminals. Thank you so much.